but I was just, as a viewer,
and an architect,
and as an architect and an urbanist, I would wonder through which lens these images are being captured. So aerial photographs historically have been quite contested to a certain extent, quite problematic, because from the moment that you can view large territories or large pieces of land from the sky, you already use them as a tool, as a device to start mapping out territories. And naturally, territories are also linking into frontiers, linking into possession, dispossession, boundaries. And then suddenly this kind of earth canvas that you're looking at starts becoming divided and is becoming something very different. And I think the way humans link to nature is also quite polemic to a certain extent, because you start creating habitats. And what does that mean, a habitat? And I think in the world that we are right now, we're talking much more about ecosystems, how everything is integrated. And this is actually starting to allude to the opposite. So I think there's a lot of discussion that you, just by having these photographs on the wall, can start suggest without being super explicit about what it is. And then, you have on one hand the veins of the earth, and you can read how the earth has the genesis of the earth, but you also start seeing here the seeds of occupation and human tension that is starting to create with nature, and also human synergy in other locations. So I think you are actually asking through your work some highly fundamental questions, even though they might not be explicitly put on the wall and explicitly, conceptualized as such. So I think there is a lot of value in just looking at these photographs.
So very interesting from what you say, from the contested aspect of the surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these are from Spain's Geological Survey, which is where they just aerial photograph. Yeah. Some of them are from the military.
Very often, in many locations, a lot of this material is generated through the military.
And as you're saying about geopolitical borders, I think that there's a lot of politics. And when I look at them, I have a sense of nostalgia, first because they're the black and white photography.
Yeah, exactly.
And that nostalgia, there's actually a word for the loss of nature. It's called solastalgia. Solastalgia? Solastalgia. Or I'm not sure if I'm
pronouncing. In which language are we talking?
SOLA, like nostalgia, but solastalgia.
Solastalgia. Okay,
I'll write it down and take it.
That's an interesting word. Okay.
But it's actually about that sort of sense of loss we feel when we see lost nature. Because if you're looking at 1956, 1957 photography, that's almost 70 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
You actually are looking at a landscape that is so much more developed now.
No, yeah, exactly.
So if you had, this is redundant, obsolete technology that's being replaced by Google Earth. So and satellites and other kind of ways of seeing. I mean, initially we could only see, we could imagine what a bird could see initially, but now we had hot air balloons, so we could get some distance.
But this is the beginning of this whole discussion around big data, isn't it? Because, you see all of this is actually a reference to where that photograph was taken, exactly at what time. I can't read it. I don't have my spectacles, but that's normally what it does. So you have like a very large territory that is being subdivided. And then you are talking about the rational system that is applied as a matrix on top of the natural. And that is kind of the first step in terms of creating big data and extraction of data and multi-layer data. And now we are so many years later, and look where big data is right now. It's just, this was literally the beginning of that in enormous revolution that happened in the last few years. And
it is happening and is actually quite scary. Yeah. Yes. I also find very interesting the aerial where you're looking at the agricultural, these agricultural sections. And they remind me of a certain segment of Teresa Magadlele's work.
Oh, okay.
Because Magadlela actually patches with skin, and then skin is related back to surface.
Beautiful.
And surface is related back to earth. And we are all made of the earth. We are all walking, talking minerals.
Yes.
So there's a kind of, I was trying to say that to Jean Dreyer, who curated this wall, and Lonwaba Kilani, who curated that wall, who are more interested in the human and the sort of simulated human aspects, where they see a spine or a vein in a river or parts of a body or a handprint, or, you know, that they're seeing kind of the imprint of
the framework of human bodies, of bones, of structure, and semblances of that. You know, be it vertebra in the lines,
Absolutely.
be it marks,
The veins,
made by
the
hand,
arteries.
the veins.
Even in urban planning, you refer a lot of that, isn't it?
and the topography of a body. You know, you've got an anatomy of the earth, you know.
The anatomy of the city, the anatomy of the urban environment.
Anatomy of a mind, you know.
Yes, very much so.
So it's all, and I also think all wealth comes from the earth. Whether you're looking at subterranean resources of the minerals and mining, whether you're looking at fishing or forestry, and then, of course, agriculture is the fourth aspect of that, exploiting the surface. And then you've got the other side of resources, you've got real estate, which is where you as architects are involved and engineers are involved, where real estate, it's all how you extract value from the earth.
Yeah, but now I think there is a kind of a movement where it's more about questioning, you know, should we really build? Or is there a way of giving back to the earth? And is there a way of be regenerative rather than just purely extraction? And I hope, at least, you know, that's also our perspective with our practice, that we now can turn it around and say, okay, how can we now not turn the dial back, but actually keep turning it, so we're actually back to the notion of regeneration, rehabilitation, giving back to nature rather than extracting from nature.
That's very interesting, because the environmental issues are very important for me, because under Section 21 or 27 of South Africa's Constitution, this plot, you know, I became involved with this property I originally bought 20 years ago in Pringle Bay with the river. And of course, they're beautiful little frogs that just jump. And a biologist gave me a list of all the animals and frogs, chameleons, reptiles, birds, and mammals that are 15 kilometers of that particular coordinate. Because we're talking longitude and latitude when we're doing the grid, right?
Yep.
But so what I started doing is making title deeds for the butterflies and for the frogs, because if we're supposed to be the hierarchy, at the tip of the hierarchy of of creatures, we've put ourselves, humans have put ourselves in control. We've actually got to think of other sentient beings. And that's where Cormac Cullinan, I don't know if you know him, he's a friend of mine. Yes. He you know, talks about wild rights, nature's rights. And there's a whole movement where even a river has a right to flow, to be clean, to be not blocked, you know, to actually have its rights as almost like a person.
Yes.
And if you think back even on slavery, where some people didn't have rights, but probably Indigenous people had the most respect for environment and landscape. So I've been doing like various types of title deeds.
Have you read some of the works of Hathaway?
Not sure.
I can send you maybe some references through. It's actually very often linked with female emancipation, interestingly enough.
I think I've got something, but please do.
Yeah, I will send you a link through, because there's some interesting writing, and maybe it can link up some way or another.
Academically, But I like the fact that you're saying that I'm not, just because it's a grid and just because we're not making any interventions other than acknowledging longitude and latitude, that we're still acknowledging this whole history of dividing and ruling and the laws.
And if you then start positioning it, is it this work that also would go?
I won't send that. No, I'm only going to go with the squares because of the concept of, you know, the 30 by 30s, which are most of the artworks from myself and other artists.
Okay.
The 30 by 30 is also the 1 foot by 1 foot. And the 1 foot by 1 foot was the king's foot.
Yeah.
So it goes back to measuring the earth according to the king's body.
It goes back to this again.
And then, of course, what do we call the foot? What do we call that object that we measure with? We call it the ruler.
Yeah.
So we are dividing, the king ruling. Yeah. Dividing and ruling. So it's the king's foot, in a way. That series is measuring modernity through the king's foot. And
so you just have amplified this, and now you're coming to the larger king foot, you know,
Yeah.
with different
But
dimensions.
you're asking the viewer
Yeah.
to engage with some really deep questions about all the things, Caroline, you've touched on. Yeah? Mark making, territory, contested territory, perspectives of looking, viewing, objectives, politics, military. I mean, I think all those things are more than enough for an audience to engage with, because you're not actively intervening and making a mark and engaging in an artistic way
surface.
with the surface.
Yeah.
And I think in that is the richness. Yeah, you're asking the viewer to engage with it.
And there's always a
becomes a
naivety to
participation,
say
yeah.
that photography is objective.
Yeah.
Well, none of these photographs are objective. They're highly subjective, as much as actually your plans that you showed there, they're also drawn with a particular intent. They're purely subjective. And I think that subjectivity is ultimately the layer. And you can then also question to what extent big data is objective and subjective. So it's asking a lot of ethical questions as well.
And our relationship with Earth, isn't it? As
Exactly,
humans, you know, there's
yes.
Earth stewardship and custodianship.
Yes, exactly.
But
yeah.
and then what's very interesting with geomatics, you know, that you know, you guys are both engineering and architecture, but with geomatics, you're actually looking at earth science